Wedding drama, how my fiancé's pink stand-up ended his mom's demands. I never thought I'd be telling this story, but here we are. You know how they say wedding planning brings out the worst in people? Well, my future mother-in-law took it to a whole new level when she demanded, and I mean demanded, to wear white at my wedding. I mean, who doesn't love a good all-white wedding photo? It's a classic look, but not exactly what I had envisioned. And if that wasn't enough, she also insisted that I wear pink. Yes, you heard that right, as in a full-on head-to-toe fuchsia ensemble. I was taken aback to say the least, not exactly my personal style. I tried to talk to her, explaining that it's not really my thing, but she wouldn't budge. I even offered to wear a light-colored dress or a pastel shade, but she was adamant that I wear pink. It got to the point where I started to wonder if all of the bridal magazines I'd read were just filling my head with unrealistic expectations. It seemed like an eternity since this request was made, and I started to doubt whether I was just imagining what I thought was a reasonable compromise. But wait, it gets better. Or at least, it did. My fiancé finally found his backbone and stood up to her. It was as if the universe was waiting for him to make that stand, to assert himself and let his future wife know that her opinions mattered. He had been quiet the whole time, not wanting to rock the boat, but when it came down to it, he knew that he couldn't just sit back and let her dictate our wedding attire. And let me tell you, it was a beautiful sight to see him say his piece and tell her that I'd be wearing soft blush, a lovely shade if I do say so myself, and that she could wear whatever color she liked. Let me take you back to where it all started. James and I met 3 years ago at a local coffee shop. Total rom-com moment. He spilled his latte all over my favorite blouse, and somehow that turned into dinner that evening. We clicked instantly, and everything was perfect. Until I met his mother, Karen. There was something about her demeanor that set off warning bells, but I tried to brush it off as mere paranoia. After all, what could possibly go wrong with meeting the family? Looking back, it's clear that Karen had a major influence on shaping James's behavior around me. On one hand, she would gush about how great I was, often to an overly italicized extent. But whenever I tried to engage in more in-depth conversations or plan future family gatherings, she'd suddenly act as if I was interrupting important conversation or somehow stealing attention away from her precious son. One occasion in particular stands out. I met James at his parents' house, all excited to see the place where he'd grown up. At the same time, Karen decided to insist that I wear a white dress to the upcoming family dinner. While I was happy to put in the effort, I politely declined, suggesting we choose an outfit that would complement the beautiful view outside. Her response caught me off guard. "But dear, pink suits you so much better. You should really dress for what suits my James best." Her statement left a bad taste in my mouth, as I felt like I wasn't enough on my own. I needed her approval to be acceptable to those around me. As for James himself, I marveled at how patient and understanding he was throughout all of this. While it was endearing at first, I started to notice a rather unsettling pattern. He would hesitate long before intervening or standing up to his overbearing mother. I began to wonder, what would it take for him to truly assert his independence in our relationship? I recall a particularly heated conversation we had about our wedding, where Karen insisted I wear white, and James ended up acquiescing to her demands. To my dismay, he then suggested that I wear a pink bouquet to match the wedding decorations. I couldn't believe he was being so ridiculous. Hadn't we had a lovely conversation about how much I hated that color before? That was the moment I realized how controlled James felt Karen was holding over him. Even in our conversations, in our daily activities, and seemingly in every step of our lives together, her authoritative presence permeated every aspect of our engagement, often to the point where James and I wouldn't make plans on our own without getting her approval. It was infuriating and at the same time, heartbreaking. But what happened next changed everything. But the real drama started during wedding planning. Karen showed up at our house one Sunday afternoon, clutching a white designer dress catalog. She announced, "I've found the perfect dress for the wedding." I thought she meant for me until she pointed at this gorgeous white gown for herself. When I politely explained that traditionally only the bride wears white, she looked at me like I'd suggested she show up in a clown costume. Then came the kicker. "Well, dear, if you're so concerned about tradition, why don't you wear pink? It would suit your complexion better." I tried to bit my tongue and keep the peace, but it was clear Karen was not going to let this drop. I tried to explain to that I had already picked out a beautiful pale blue dress, one that complemented the summer wedding theme and would make me feel confident and beautiful. But Karen wasn't having it. She scoffed at the idea of me wearing anything other than white, insisting that it was the only color that would be worthy of our special day. I started to feel frustrated and annoyed, wondering how my fiancé had managed to get along with her all these years. But then my fiancé stepped in and gently took the reins. "Mom, I think what our partner is trying to say is that she's already found a dress that makes her feel happy and confident, and that's what matters most to me. Not the color of the dress, but how it makes my partner feel." Karen looked taken aback, but my fiancé calmly continued, "We've discussed this already, and we're both happy with our choices. Let's not make a big deal out of it, okay?" I was fuming. James and I had our first major argument that night. I told him his mother was deliberately trying to ruin our wedding, while he kept saying, "That's just how she is." It felt like we were from two different worlds. Every word he uttered only added fuel to the fire of my frustration. But then, something inside me decided to take a step back. I paused and asked, "Would you be okay with my dad showing up in a wedding dress?" The absurdity of it finally clicked. His mother's efforts to turn the wedding day into a disaster, his lack of empathy, and the ridiculous nature of my question all merged into a single moment of clarity. How James looked at me, unsure of what to say, was priceless. For a moment, the tension in the room dissipated and we both burst into laughter. His eyes sparkled, and his voice was filled with amusement as he replied, "Are you nuts?" Things took an unexpected turn when James's father and aunt got involved. His dad, Tom, had apparently been watching this circus from the sidelines and finally decided enough was enough. He sat down with James and shared some hard truths about enabling Karen's behavior over the years. For too long, James's family had excused and justified Karen's destructive actions, enabling her to continue causing chaos in their lives. Meanwhile, his Aunt Sarah revealed that Karen had pulled similar stunts at her own son's wedding. It was a disaster when the bride called it off 2 weeks before the ceremony. Aunt Sarah explained that the decision was made due to Karen's excessive meddling and pressure on the wedding planning process. Karen's inability to respect boundaries and her tendency to overstep her role as a member of the wedding party had driven a wedge between her and the rest of the family. Tom's harsh words cut deep, but they were a wake-up call for James. He realized that his family had been enabling Karen's behavior for far too long. Tom shared stories about the many times Karen had stepped on their toes, not just as a mother-in-law-to-be, but as a part of this circle of friends and family. It was clear that Karen's actions were not a new phenomenon, but rather a pattern of behavior that had been encouraged by their lack of boundaries and accountability. As Tom and James spoke, Aunt Sarah listened intently, sensing that this was a moment of great significance. She reminded James that their family had a long history of standing up for what was right, even when it was difficult. It was time for James to reconsider his relationship with his fiancé's family, particularly with Karen, who seemed to get away with destructive behavior time and time again. The final showdown happened at a family dinner. Karen brought up the white dress again, but this time, James stood up. His exact words were, "Mom, I love you, but this is my wedding. My fiancé will wear white, and you will not. If you can't respect that, don't come." Karen had always thought that wearing a white wedding dress would be a beautiful way to bond with her own mother and carry on a family tradition. But now, she realized that history was repeating itself. Just like her mother had done all those years ago, Karen was attempting to exert control over a significant aspect of her daughter's life. The more she thought about it, the more she understood why James had reacted with such intensity. The silence that followed was deafening. Karen burst into tears as the weight of her own unresolved emotions finally came crashing down. It was then that James realized the depth of his mother's pain and the reasons behind her actions. In that moment, he felt a mix of emotions: love, sadness, and a deep sense of responsibility. James took a step forward, putting a gentle hand on his mother's shoulder. "Mom, I'm sorry," he said softly, "but please try to understand. This is my wedding, not yours. It's about me and my fiancé, not about our families." As he spoke, he remembered all the times his mother had put her own needs before those of others. He realized that this wasn't just about the wedding dress, it was about a lifetime of unmet expectations and unresolved conflicts. In that moment, something shifted inside Karen. She saw her son standing before her, grown and strong, but also vulnerable. She understood that her actions had been motivated by a deep-seated desire to hold on to the past, rather than embracing the present. As James held her close, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. It was a small step towards healing, but it was a start. Now, while we're on the topic of wedding drama, let me share another story that recently came my way. This one's about a husband whose wife went full control freak after a drunken incident with her best friend. Mike found himself in a tough spot when his wife's best friend, Jessica, kissed him at a party while completely drunk. Being the honest guy he is, he told his wife, Rachel, the next day. Instead of appreciating his honesty, Rachel went ballistic, but not at Jessica. She demanded Mike cut off all contact with any female friends or colleagues. Rachel's reaction left Mike bewildered. He didn't understand why his honesty was seen as a betrayal, rather than a selfless act. Jessica's reckless behavior was clearly not Rachel's concern, yet she chose to take it out on Mike instead of addressing the issue at hand. Mike felt trapped and confused. He tried to explain to Rachel that Jessica's actions had nothing to do with him, that he wasn't interested in pursuing anything with her. But Rachel wouldn't listen, her anger and hurt getting the better of her. The more Mike tried to reason with her, the more he felt like he was walking a thin line between being supportive and being suffocated by Rachel's demands. As the days went by, Mike began to feel like he was losing his identity. He couldn't see his female friends, Jessica was still on the scene, Rachel wouldn't give him any freedom. He started to wonder if being a good husband meant sacrificing everything that made him. The rules of their relationship were unclear, and Mike was left to navigate this new dynamic on his own. Jessica's words hung in the air, leaving everyone stunned and searching for answers. The thought of Rachel's manipulative behavior was almost too difficult to comprehend. But as Jessica continued to unfold the complexity of it all, it became clear that this was only the tip of the iceberg. The so-called innocent kiss between Jessica and Mike wasn't as harmless as it seemed. Rachel had deliberately goaded Jessica into drinking too much and then encouraging her to make a move on Mike, all in the name of testing his loyalty. But why? What had Rachel been so desperate to prove? As the dynamics between the three women began to shift, the weight of Rachel's actions settled heavily on her shoulders. Mike, seemingly oblivious to the undercurrents, remained steadfast in his love for Rachel. But Jessica's revelation had planted a seed of doubt, and she couldn't help but wonder if Mike's devotion was genuine or merely a consequence of Rachel's machinations. The question loomed over them, threatening to upend the entire relationship. Was Mike truly committed to Rachel, or had he become a pawn in her game of manipulation and control? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain: the truth had been revealed, and things would never be the same again. In our last two stories, we touched on a common theme: toxic relationships built on control and insecurity. My ex-husband Mike filed for divorce, realizing that our marriage was based on manipulation. For me and my fiancé James were in couples counseling, learning to set healthy boundaries with his mom, Karen. I have to admit, it wasn't easy at first. His mom would often make snide comments about how I'm not doing things the right way, and it would drive me nuts. But we've both learned to speak up and set boundaries when we feel uncomfortable. It's not always easy, but it's essential for a healthy relationship. Dealing with a toxic partner or family member can be draining, but it's worth it in the end. I want my marriage to James to be based on respect and communication, not control and insecurity. And I know I'm not alone in this. Many people have had to navigate these types of relationships and come out stronger on the other side. Now, let's talk about something a little lighter. So it's been a fun challenge to figure out what to wear on our wedding day. I've decided to wear white, and James is thinking of wearing a light blue shirt. Karen suggested that he should wear pink, but we both decided that's not going to happen. Sorry girl, just kidding. The truth is, we're excited to start our new life together, and we want to make sure our wedding reflects that. It's all about finding what works for us and not worrying about what anyone else thinks. After all, our wedding is about us, not about pleasing anyone else's expectations. And that's an important lesson I've learned from this whole experience. It's okay to break family traditions if they're not serving us anymore. In fact, it's essential to do so to move forward and build a happy, healthy relationship. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more wild stories. And let me know in the comments if you've ever dealt with a Karen in your life. What was your experience like? And how did you navigate it? I'd love to hear your stories.